Christianity believes that God came down from heaven to earth, lived as a perfect human being.
On Good Friday we remember Jesus, suffering and dying on the cross and bearing the weight of the world's sin.
However, 3 days later, he rose again, conquering death.
The resurrection has a huge impact on the Christian faith and gives us hope for our future.
Without it, Jesus would still be in the grave and death would have won.
And today we are going to talk about the transformation of the disciples as evidence for the resurrection.
Matthew 28:12-15 says,
When the chief priests had met with the elders, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them,
You are to say his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble.
So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed.
and this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this day.
So, as we think about that scripture, there are many things that don't really make sense, considering the idea that Jesus' disciples would take his body from the tomb and then pretend he was alive.
Firstly, we can see in scriptures that the Jews were waiting for a king. Many people thought this king would wield political power, unlike Jesus, who was loving and humble.
Therefore, the disciples would have been brought up with a different idea of who the Messiah was going to be. This could have caused the disciples a lot of uncertainty and could have had something to do with Judas ultimately betraying Jesus.
So how could these 11 men who rarely understood what Jesus was saying come up with a plot to steal Jesus' body and fool the authorities to thinking he was alive?
Even more, all of the disciples, except for John, were killed for their faith. And even John didn't get off lightly. He was boiled alive in oil but survived.
If the disciples really stole the body, it's highly unlikely that all 11 wouldn't change their statement, that they would be willing to get persecuted and ultimately die for what they knew would be a lie.
Secondly, we can see Peter denying Jesus 3 times before the crucifixion. After the resurrection, he played a huge role in the early church.
Thomas doubted that he was resurrected, even though Jesus told them this would happen.
He required evidence before believing that Jesus was alive. But when he saw the nail marks in Jesus' resurrected body, he was transformed into a believing disciple.
Lastly, Alexander Maclaren said, You cannot build a church on a dead Christ. But the early church was incredibly successful.
Jesus spent 40 days on earth after the resurrection before ascending to heaven. During that time, he appeared to his disciples and to more than 500 people.
Imagine a court case that had more than 500 witnesses. I don't think the jury would have a hard time figuring out that one.
I hope that helps you understand the impact the resurrection had on Jesus' disciples.
Have a happy Easter!